I think eventually this archaic return, which is what this bohemian thing has always represented, will be felt, will be heard. We have very little time now. If I believed that salvation had to come from political institutions, I would just throw up my hands in despair. It's very hard for people sometimes to figure out whether I'm an optimist or not. Let's get something straight here. I am the most optimistic person you have ever met. I'm absolutely convinced that there is nothing wrong, and that nothing can go wrong, and that nothing will go wrong, and that if something needs to be done, you will find yourself doing it. Now, all purveyors of this kind of goody two-shoes point of view have to then come to terms with, well, then how come the world is such a terrible place? Well, it's a terrible place because it is an interference pattern composed of many times and many places. And there is no peace until the end. There is no let-up in pressure until the end. As we approach the transcendental object at the end of time, history moves faster and faster. We have been approaching this transcendental object since before there was a we to speak of in human terms. In other words, this is the same attractor that pulled life out of the oceans, caused primates to stand on their hind legs, and so forth and so on. But obviously, pick a number, about 20,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, the process quickened. We turned a corner. Everything began to move faster. And again, at the fall of Rome, faster, faster. And again, in the 20th century, faster, faster, faster. Well, nobody has drawn the obvious conclusion from this. If we're going faster and faster, faster and faster, then hell, we're going to get somewhere pretty soon. And that's where I think we are. We can hardly go any faster without the speed of our acceleration passing into the domains of humanly cognizable time. In other words, the reason things are getting weirder and weirder is because the space-time continuum itself is accelerating. It's entirely possible that the last half of the life of the universe will happen in about 3% of the total life of the universe. Nobody said that it has to take as long going down as it took to come up. It may be that the coming up took a long, long time, and the going down can be catastrophic, sudden, unexpected, dynamic, we say. And that's why I take and I return to this theme, because hey, I return to all themes. But I return to this theme now, that history is an anticipation. History is the last call that the train is leaving the station, you know, and the call echoes back to Çatalhöyük and slightly beyond. But in our own lifetime, it's now palpable. You know, all you have to do is close your eyes in a quiet place, twist up a bomber, think, and you will behold the transcendental object at the end of time. You can feel it informing your own life. I mean, you spend a good deal of time denying it because rationalists tell you you're either losing your mind or it's impossible and it can't be happening. But this sense of plottedness, of connectedness, this sense that we are all in a universal drama playing to a close, this sense that we are larger than ourselves, that we are somehow characters on a stage. This is a phenomenon of the light at eventide. This is a phenomenon of the final moments of the cosmic drama. And I think it's tremendously exciting. I think this is what nature set about 700 million years ago on this planet. That it's not about chipmunk after chipmunk after chipmunk for eon after eon after eon. I mean, a little of that goes a long ways. I'm sure you'll agree with me. That's all very fine, but the way nature works is she builds upon her complexity. Having achieved one level of complexity, it sinks into the background and becomes the platform for yet further complexity. So out of molecules comes life. Out of life comes climaxed ecosystems. Out of those ecosystems, higher animals. Out of higher animals, human beings. Out of human beings, technologically motivated human beings, and out of them something which we can barely imagine, and many of us don't even want to try. We can feel that we're more than animal. We have this dimension which we call spiritual, and some of us buy into some off-the-shelf explanation. Catholicism, Mormonism, Jainism, something like that. Others of us wrestle with it, or we smorgasbord it into, you know, a little Kabbalah, Taoism, a little Tantra, a little Hasidism. It doesn't matter, you know, do that. But whatever it is, we wrestle with this part of ourselves which cannot be simply dismissed as monkey meat. And I think that it is the soul, that the soul is actually an entity in history seeking to be born, and that the enterprise of history is the creation of the collectivity as an eternal, indestructible, trans-dimensional object of some sort, the tool at the end of time. I've quoted probably to you before this thing from Yeats about once out of nature I would be a thing of gold and enameling, set to sing before the lords and ladies of Byzantium of what has been and what will be. In other words, out of organic existence comes something not exactly inorganic, but not exactly organic, a mechanical nightingale, fit to sing before the Emperor of Byzantium. This is what the flying saucer is, in my estimation. It's nothing more than an organometallic projection of the future state of the human soul. We are literally like caterpillars, or the components of a slime mold. We are undergoing a series of chemical signals and transductions of change that are preparing us to become unimaginable to ourselves. And there's no way out. The only place in nature where you see this is with caterpillars on limited food plants, where the caterpillars eat without a thought in their minds until there's nothing left. And then they go into shock from hunger, and they begin to spin, and their enzyme systems go crazy, and hundreds of genes are suppressed, and thousands of genes are turned on simultaneously, and lo and behold, the caterpillar changes into something completely different, an organism of a completely different order. I have never heard a Darwinian evolutionary biologist explain how gradual evolution could get you the coordination of thousands of genes required in that process. Be that as it may, that is what we're involved in, and the enzymatic juice of this process is technology. And, you know, if when I say technology, you think of D9 caterpillars and freeways and stuff like that, then you're driving using your rear view mirror. By technology, I mean steam engines that you can put 50 inside a human hair. Some of you may have seen the cover of Science News a year ago. 10,000 steam engines on a chip, 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter in diameter. More steam engines on that friggin' chip than there were in England in 1850. Imagine that. Technology simply means the extensions of the human mind into matter. And we do this when we engineer vaccines, when we micro-engineer computer chips. The most advanced now are not even designed by human beings. Human beings dictate the design parameters, and computers solve the architectonic problems and then etch the chips without ever consulting with a human being. This is going on all around us. I don't find it frightening. I find it very reassuring. Remember back in the 1950s, those of you who were born then, how there used to be this persistent fantasy that in the future the world will be run by machines? The people who were saying this, the implication was it must have been wrested then from the hands of assholes at some point. Because, you know, machines, impartial, patient, fair, no bias of gender, race, or creed. It doesn't sound so bad to me. I mean, you want to talk about reestablishing connection with the guy in mind. What do you think these computers are made of? They're made out of the earth. They're made out of silicon, glass, gold, silver, lead, arsenic. It reads like the alchemist's cookbook. It's a direct return to the world of the elemental electrons, a direct connecting back into the Gaian body. And it's very funny for me to talk about it and for you to listen about it, because it's a private thing for each one of us. There's nobody who can explain it to you, really, except yourself and your friends. All the metaphors being handed down from the top are bogus, because the people at the top, they don't know what is going on. They have to pay guys ponytails just to turn on the machines in the morning. They are so deeply in our hands that it brings a tear to my eye to even think about it. And so it's very important to be gentle with people, and this could almost serve as a final point. My mission, aside from whatever agenda my ego has about how I want to be the guy who figured out how everything works and all that, and get the combined Nobel Peace Prize and Physics Prize, but aside from that, and far more important to you, what this is all about, I believe, is permitting people to abandon anxiety. Need to investigate for themselves the situation, and you will be very, very heartened. It's not nearly as bad as you've been told. You've been told a lot of stuff by a lot of people. The only authentic thing in most people's lives, and they may have sullied it, sold it out, destroyed it, distorted it, whatever, but the only authentic thing in most people's lives is sex. And if the establishment could figure out how to take it... I finally found the button. So imagine, since I assume, at least at some point in your career, nearly every one of us has had some brush with sexuality. Imagine if there were something equally interesting, equally slippery, equally enlightening, but not necessarily tattooed to your forehead like sexuality is, so that, unless you were smart, you could miss it. You could go from birth to the grave and never know. It's sort of like going from birth to the grave and never having an orgasm. That is, in fact, our circumstance, because God knows how many people in Western civilization in the past 1,000 years have gone to the grave without ever knowing a moment of transcendental consciousness. I don't care how many rosaries they were saying. I don't care how much of that ergot-infested bread they were bolting down. You know, it just can't compare with modern pharmaceuticals extracted from plants. So my mission is to try and empower people and say, hey, look, you don't have to go, I mean, he's a nice man, don't misunderstand me, but you don't have to ask Ramana Maharshi or Gurdjieff, or another nice man, don't get me wrong, but not smarter than you or me. That's the thing. Haven't you figured out by now that nobody is smarter than you are? And if they are, you can't understand what they're saying anyway, so why bother? The search for somebody smarter than you are is totally futile, because when you find them, you're not going to know what the hell they're talking about. So basically, it's better to get high with a little help from your friends